Now, every year, thousands of parents hear the devastating news that their child has cancer. Navigating the number of different treatments available can be a difficult and daunting thing. But now leading experts have called for changes to clinical drug trials to allow younger patients to access new drugs. Debbie Binner's 18-year-old daughter Chloe died last year from the disease and has been campaigning for a change to those rules. Debbie, lovely to see you.
Hi.
What was Chloe like?
She was just wonderful. I'm obviously biased, being her mother, but she was like, most people's teenagers. She was full of fun, full of life, really difficult at times, argumentative, all those kind of things.
Typical teenager.
Typical teenager, yeah.
You were looking forward to seeing her grow into a young woman. I'm sure she was doing great at that, but must have been so frustrating that the things that perhaps could have helped her beat the cancer weren't available. Explain why that was.
Yeah, it was an absolute... It's like walking into a nightmare for us. One minute we've got this beautiful 15-year-old girl which seemingly had the world at her feet. The next minute we get a cancer diagnosis, and we get one of the worst possible cancer diagnoses, and that is of bone cancer. And the outcomes, the treatments for bone cancer, which this particular kind of bone cancer tends to affect children between 10 and 20 years old. Now, this particular kind of bone cancer, treatments and outcomes, survival, haven't changed in some 30 to 40 years. So we quickly realised, first of all, we had a cancer diagnosis of our wonderful daughter. The next thing, we realised that we were really fighting a whole system that was built up against my daughter's treatment and my daughter's survival.
We'll talk about the pharmaceutical companies in a moment and their responsibilities here, but the first thing to point out is that Chloe just wasn't old enough yet to take part in any clinical trials of new medicines.
Yeah, this is a very, very complicated issue, but very briefly, Chloe was 17 and 9 months when we wanted to try her on a new experimental treatment. We didn't know if this treatment was going to work or not, but it was showing promise in her particular illness. We thought we would get on that trial. We found the trial that was being actually run 3 miles from our house, which is actually unheard of because there aren't enough clinical trials for children. We thought, obviously, few months, this is my child's life. She had run out of all conventional treatments, so we needed something new. They would not allow us on that trial. Now, 18 is not always the bottom age range for a trial, but it is just up to the individual companies what age range that they put on, the lower age range they put on their drugs.
So you like that open up a bit more, as we're hearing with other experimental drugs for other illnesses.
Yeah, well, we are not going to get, there's no clinical reason. In this particular trial, it's really important to mention, there was no clinical reason. This was purely a bureaucratic impediment that drug companies don't want to invest in children and teenagers because they don't make them enough money and they involve lots and lots of extra paperwork. So there's an issue in the industry generally that they don't want to invest in them.
The other thing with Chloe's cancer, it was called Ewing's sarcoma, quite a rare form of bone cancer. Because it was rare, there's no incentive for the pharmaceutical companies to develop medicines to treat it. In fact, that's a big question in terms of what they do, developing new drugs that we all need, like antibiotics. If there's no financial imperative, they don't seem to want to bother. Do you think that they should be forced to? They should change.
Well, if I could just say really quickly about rare cancers, that 54% of deaths are from rare cancers, if you kind of pile them all together. So rare cancers are a really important area to explore and a major cause of death from cancer. So the pharmaceutical companies and everybody else in the industry, because it's not just pharmaceutical companies that run clinical trials, they have to think about this because this is in everybody's interests. Should you make pharmaceutical industries force them to invest in these kind of drugs? I think that's a very difficult question. They are private companies and they need to make money. But I think
they have a moral obligation, you think?
I think we all have a moral obligation to look for solutions, maybe working together, private-public partnerships, to work together to get the drugs that we need, the drugs that the patient needs, putting the patient right at the centre of these things.